Welcome to the show. I've been thinking a lot this week about the importance of trust and what the best ways are as a coach and a speaker and a communication professional, perhaps, to be gaining trust from your current and future audiences. Where and how do you need to be showing up in order to become a trusted voice and guide? Now, it's hard to get people to trust you these days, and the coaching and speaking world has its own share of charlatans, crooks, and creeps. How then can we establish a trust relationship amongst all of that? What I want to share with you is what I think now to be one of the most essential weapons or tools in the war for trust and truth, and how you can help to seal the deal as your ideal audience's trusted guide. Welcome to Present Influence, the show that helps coaches, speakers, and business leaders develop the communication skills to influence and inspire. My name's John Ball, a keynote coach, professional speaker, and your guide on the journey to mastery level communication and presentation skills. My mission is to provide professional communicators like you with everything you need to maximize your impact and present with influence. Follow the show on your favorite podcast app for weekly episodes and interviews with influence experts. And please consider leaving a 5-star review on your podcast listening app. It means the world to me, and it also helps other people know that this is a show that's worth tuning into. So earlier this week, I released an episode with a podcast systems expert called Joe Casabona, super nice guy. And one of the things that was coming up in that conversation was how important it is now for people who are in personal and professional development as coaches, speakers, and consultants to be able to establish a significant level of trust, and how podcasts are one of the key vehicles for making that happen in this day and age. And here's one of the main reasons for that, because there's no doubt we are in an environment and an economy of low trust. Misinformation surrounds us, and these things are probably only going to get worse as AI gets better and better, and it becomes easier to mislead and misguide people. People are desperately searching for sources and voices that they can trust. And that's why it may no longer be one of those sort of optional things to have some kind of involvement in podcasting, probably to the point, I would say, of having your own show. And whilst I know that for some of you, you might be thinking, well, that's a lot of work, I would say it isn't the first thing you should do if you're just setting up a coaching or speaking business. And I do have some thoughts and ideas about what you maybe should be doing if that's where you are. But one of the best strategies for building and growing a coaching business is getting out there and speaking. So, podcast guesting fits into that very nicely. And that probably is a better place for you to begin, start getting your name out there, getting better and practiced at what it is that you talk about so that you can get smoother in your responses and engage with your audience more. Learning how to prepare for these kinds of things as well, because most people just don't bother and will show up for podcast interviews and be like, oh, well, I have the knowledge that you already want to speak to me about. What do I need to prepare? As a speaker, you would never show up for a talk unprepared unless you had been asked to, unless it was a purely improvised presentation that you had been asked to do, which isn't really something that happens for most people. So why show up to a podcast interview not fully prepared? Now, there are a handful of people I think who do an exceptionally good job of being podcast guests. And if you haven't checked out one of my previous episodes with Christine Ammerman, Christine was my guest in episode 171 of Present Influence. So I do recommend going back and checking that episode out. She really knows how to show up as a podcast guest, to show up researched, having listened to some of the episodes. Go and get some great pointers from her on doing that. And perhaps start your podcast guesting journey sooner rather than later. Now, at this stage, I would also say I wouldn't be too concerned in getting started as to whether you're going on a podcast with a big following or not. You really just want to get some reps in initially, so don't worry too much about that. But as you go forward with it, you will want to be a little more strategic to going on to shows that kind of have your audience and have the kinds of people who you might want to be signing up as clients, and ideally also have some kind of following that is going to give you a bit of bang for your buck and help you to move the needle. Some of the things that have turned up inquiries and lead generation for me the most have been appearing as a guest on some bigger shows where I have shown up prepared and I've given a very clear call to action. That is definitely the kind of thing that you should be doing as a guest if you're getting started with this. However, if you're already pretty well established as a coach, speaker, or consultant, it may be the case that now is the right time for you to start thinking about having your own podcast. And certainly, if you listen to the episode with Joe and you take up his resources that were offered in that last episode, you will have some of the systems already in place to be able to start to delegate and dish out the work that's involved in that. So, really, probably all you'll have to do is plan, record, and schedule for yourself and have an assistant or a producer or whoever else have someone else take care of some of the time consuming elements of that, like editing the show and audio engineering and all those good things that you probably will want to have because realistically, this is going to be something that's going to be representing you in the professional world. So, some thrown together, unedited, untreated podcast that's just you and someone else chatting about whatever is not going to cut it here. Think about this from a professional state. Now, this is something that came from Joe, actually, that a question that had come up at a podcast convention as to whether, as a podcast host, whether you should be doing stuff from a sort of professional style studio as much as possible, or whether to do these sort of videos and recordings where you're out and about, which are quite common now. The answer that was given by an industry expert was that if you are really looking to establish yourself as a trusted thought leader, you probably should be doing your recordings from a professional studio. People do associate that level of professionalism with higher quality. So I think about it from those terms. Here's another really key thing. A lot of people, when they're thinking about starting a podcast as a speaker or as a coach or consultant, are thinking about doing guest interview shows. And I would probably advise you, even though I have a show where I do interview a lot of guests myself, I would say probably don't go that way. Maybe start off just having you and your knowledge, or if you're not working alone, have you and your business partner, or you have a panel of the people who you work with, if that's going to work better, or maybe even take it in turns to record elements of the show. But don't do an interview show. And the reason I say that is because interviewing in itself is not an easy skill. I have certainly got better at it over the years since starting my show in 2019, but I am by no means an expert interviewer. So I would still not consider myself to be an amazing interviewer. I think I do a decent job. But one of the things I'm not doing when I'm interviewing is really establishing my expertise. And when I'm interviewing someone else, I'm helping to establish their expertise, and whatever credibility and following and trust I have from my audience, I am sharing with the guests that I bring onto my show. So I still do think it's worth you being a guest on other people's shows and having that as part of your growth strategy for lead generation and opportunity. I wouldn't miss out on that at all. And if that's something that you want to discuss and to understand how to do better, I have a free guide on how to be an amazing podcast guest. You can get that from my website, presentinfluence.com, and completely free for you to download. And if you actually want to have a chat with me about that, just reach out either through the contact page on my website or connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find the information to do that in the show notes for this episode. And I'll be more than happy to talk to you and maybe even help you with your plan for guiding you to start a podcast and how to make that really work for you. So the key thing here is this is about establishing you as a trusted voice and guide for your audience. And so it doesn't have to be that you're delivering keynote level podcast episodes every single week. That's a lot of work. It might just be 5, 10, 15 minutes of you on a particular topic that you can cut out a piece of content. You can even use a lot of AI tools now for helping you to figure out what do I want to cover on these particular topics. If I'm doing, I've used AI for this as well. Put in some prompts of, if I'm doing a podcast on this topic, give me some episode ideas. and it will throw some stuff out. I would even say maybe see if you can find some podcasts from people who are in a similar area to you and make sure they will have maybe already covered a lot of the topics that you might want to cover as well. You probably want to change titles from what they've done. What you may also notice when you do that is how badly some people name their podcast episodes and their podcasters. And this is why this is such an important thing. I think a podcast can position you just as well in your market now as a book can, and it's free for people to access. One thing that I've heard from people who listen to this show on a regular basis, and people who've been my clients for a number of years as well, will say that they hear my voice in their head. I I kind of love that as well as find it a little bit scary, but people will say they hear my voice in their head. So when they will say, "Oh, maybe what do I think John would say in this situation?" Well, I love that anyone would even think, "Oh, what does John think in this situation?" And hear my voice because they've heard me enough times and are familiar enough with my take to know what it sounds like. That is a very special position of trust. And that's what I'm saying that you can have with your own podcast without a huge amount of work. You can keep this pretty well streamlined and flowing. And this is why I say probably avoid going down the path of interview episodes. I'm not saying never do that, but if you want something that's going to be manageable, helping to establish you as an industry expert and thought leader, maybe now is the time to be thinking about starting up your own podcast. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, and certainly I would love to hear from you if you're looking for any help or assistance or guidance on being able to follow down this path as to whether it's the right time for you to do this, and if you are going to do it, maybe you want to know things like, what should I call my show? What will I talk about? How often will I do episodes? And all those things. How will I plan this out? Who will I get to help me? Well, if you want some help with that, I'm more than happy to. I'm not a podcast coach as such. I've worked in the podcast industry for a good amount of time. I've worked with podcast training companies, and I've had my own show since 2019. So I'm pretty well entrenched in the industry and the knowledge, and certainly happy to have a chat about it. Here's what I'll say as well. If you are going to do solo episodes, I would aim to plan out more than your first 6 or 7 episodes. Maybe try and plan out 10. Perhaps even try and batch record them. So give yourself a couple of hours, record maybe in 10-minute slots, because you don't really want it to be going too much over that for solo episodes. And then maybe hand those over to someone else to edit, or maybe even use some AI tools to edit those down and quickly turn them around. You don't need all the bells and whistles at this stage, but you may want to make sure you at least have some decent recording equipment. Things like not using the internal mic on your computer, not using your mobile device to record the episodes. Although, if that is all you've got, certainly you could start with that. But I would also guess if you are in a position where you already have clients and your business is doing pretty well, a little bit of investment in a like €200, dollar, pound microphone or so. I have a Samsung Q9U, Shure MV7s you can get now that plug straight into your computer and will make you sound like a pro. So, you don't you don't have to worry too much about all the other aspects of it. You don't want a grainy camera, you don't want horrible audio, and it's not a huge investment. But I would avoid things like I do a lot of webinars and stuff with headsets, and they're cool stuff, but you probably don't really want to be recording a podcast episode onto them, although it might just suffice. So I think it is worth making that little bit of investment into a bit of recording and video equipment, especially for getting started on going on other people's shows. Podcast hosts are definitely going to appreciate you if you show up and you've got a good quality microphone, good quality video, hopefully a high-speed Wi-Fi connection, and ideally good audio acoustics as well for the room that you're in. I don't have the best here where I am, and it's something that I keep thinking I do need to get someone to come in and audio treat this room. One of these days I will. But you don't need all of that to get started, and that's really a key thing here. It's said often that you would probably need multiple points of contact before you really do have that level of trust from someone where they feel confident in who you are and comfortable enough to trust you. So I think with this particular path, you do want to make sure, and if you're going to do it, you might want to do it as a limited series. You might want to do it as something that you're going to do temporarily. Every year, maybe going to do 10 episodes, or maybe it's something you want to have ongoing. So there's no hard and fast rules to this, but I certainly think you want to aim for at least getting 10 episodes knocked out, even if that's all you're going to do this year, and have those available, release them in a drip format and start having your podcast, your show, start promoting it in some places, have it featured on your website and start going on other shows, mentioning it on those other shows. Have people come and check you out because they're going to love what you can provide for them for free. And they're also going to start to hear your voice on a more regular basis. And if you're adding value, if you're specific enough to what you work with your audience and some things you talk about, don't be afraid to give away knowledge. Now, there may be some stuff you definitely want to keep back in your business. Sure, great. But certainly for the most part, you want to be able to share enough that people are going to be able to take action and see that you do know what you're talking about. You do have some expertise and you're not holding back from them. You're not holding back from them. You're giving them enough that they can start moving forward. And of course, if they want to accelerate that journey, you want to give them the opportunities to be able to come and do that with you. Now, I probably wouldn't start advertising my own coaching services within the first several episodes. That's something maybe when you've got 5 or 6 episodes out, that might be a time where you could start to have some calls to action that are encouraging people to come and perhaps work with you when you've had a bit of an opportunity to establish some trust with people. The good thing with creating this kind of content is you can repurpose it. You can use it on all sorts of different social media. You can create clips from it. You can use it to get ideas and inspiration for other articles, put your scripts back into AI and ask it to pick out themes and related topics that you might want to do some episodes and articles around. There's a lot you can do in terms of repurposing the content that you work with here and utilizing it to make your social media presence easier as well. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck with really not that much work to go into a podcast. So yeah, one of the big differences between podcasts and other social media content is it's hard to reuse a lot of other content. And so most social media content is ephemeral. It doesn't last very long. It'll maybe have a week or a couple of weeks of longevity. Something you post on LinkedIn might do several rounds. Something you post on other social media platforms might get a bit of interaction for 7 days, maybe a bit more. So most content doesn't have that much longevity. Podcasts are a little different. So people will, if you have a podcast that has good information and is on a topic that people are interested in, people will very often go and listen to your back catalog of episodes. They will go and check out earlier topics and see what's been talked about. A good example of this for me recently was I checked out a podcast on marketing for coaches from somebody who I quite enjoy as a speaker. And I didn't just listen to the latest episode. I went right back to the start of the show and started listening all the way through. And that is a pretty common thing to find with podcast listeners, that they're not just going to listen to your latest episode. People will go back and listen to your catalog if it has information that is valuable for them. This is also something that can end up over time giving you content that can be transcribed and worked into books and other resources, other information products that you could ultimately sell. So I really do think there's a lot of high value in this, a lot of opportunities for creating points of contact with people and to become a trusted voice and guide for the audience that you want to serve by having your own podcast. Now, if this is something that's piquing your interest and you would like to know more about it, or you at least have to have a chat about how you proceed from here, I'm very happy to have that chat with you and see if there's any way that I can help you to move forward. So reach out through the contact form in my website, presentinfluence.com, or contact me on LinkedIn, where I hang out a lot, my main social media place. And you'll find the links to do that, if we're not already connected there, in the show notes. I would also like to invite you to follow my LinkedIn newsletter, which will have some updates for the show, as well as different articles, topics and themes that are related to presentation skills and to developing your influence. That's pretty much it for this solo episode from me. And I'm going to be back next time with influence expert Lida Citron, and had a wonderful chat with Lida. And she has an amazing book on influence out at the moment. And we had a great conversation. We even had a few things that we didn't completely agree on, which certainly made things interesting for both of us. So I hope you'll come and join us for that. That will be out next Wednesday. For now, I'm trying out having my interview episodes on Wednesday and my solo episodes on Friday, and keeping this level of production for a while with the show to see how it goes. But I'd love your thoughts and feedback. What are the topics that you would like to see covered on the show? Who are the guests who you'd like me to have or be interviewing? Maybe it's you that you'd like to reach out and let me know if that's the case. And maybe you have some thoughts or ideas about other ways that we can establish trust in this low trust economy that we're in right now. I'd love to hear from them and maybe even bring you on the show to talk about it. All right, that's it from me. Wherever you're going, whatever you're doing, have an amazing week. I'll see you again very soon. Take care.